So that I came up with some proposals that perhaps we could look into, and in that context also examine what Kerry presented, if that really can fit the bill in the context of what we see in the continent. And these are some of the thoughts that actually came up when we had our African Ministers of Finance meeting early this year. What we see as a priority in the context of going forward in transforming Africa to be the next global growth pole. One of the proposals is that we need to improve on political and economic governance. And this is with the view of basically building a strong developmental state. State should not just be there for power's sake, where politicians take the opportunity to grab as much as they can, but rather the state should be there to create relevant regulatory framework and laws that can facilitate credible economic framework and political process that indeed translates into citizens benefiting from the economic growth. The other issue that we talk about is the need to scale up investment in education. I think it is not sufficient just to talk about that, oh, now we have universal access to free primary education and probably secondary education. I want to ask us, which economy ever developed from free primary education alone? Because that is very basic. It is good for learning to read and write, but beyond that, how does it help us? And so, you have free primary education, you have people going to school for up to 16 years maybe, and then after that, what next? They don't have the appropriate skills to participate in this new economic model. So we are saying that in this new thinking, that perhaps African governments ought to spend more time developing intermediate institutions and improving universities, where students or human capital can actively be developed in a manner that corresponds to the development needs of the country. But we are also saying that state is not the only player in development anymore. If growth is to be sustainable, we must as well create enabling environment for other players. Civil society organizations, for example, for very long have been providing small and medium-scale enterprise finances. But in many African countries, legal framework does not support this kind of initiative. We need to work on how we improve it so that we can access the people living in poverty can access finances to be able to carry out productive activities. We also think that there has to be a deliberate process of stimulating faster economic growth, and this economic growth must be sustainable and must indeed, in our view, address poverty reduction. We cannot just focus on marketing investment for Africa as being an area where you get the best return of your dollar. No, because as you know, for instance in Kenya, the economies were right, but the politics were wrong. And when all hell broke loose, all the monies disappeared. So you might as well spend your time also putting a little bit of dollar in that, we call them in Kiswahili common mwananchi, in the citizens. Spend your time on designing the right safety nets that can indeed give them dignified livelihood, but also spend your time in creating enabling environment for them to be employed in productive activities. We also think that poverty reduction programs should not be seen as charity, where governments actually use them for fundraising, but not really put deliberate resources in them. Because you find when we are campaigning for debt relief, we are told that we cannot build this school because the debt relief money that was supposed to be relieved by UK has not been done. So that we actually pegging poverty reduction efforts on monies that come from abroad. I think for me, we need to think around making poverty reduction effort being a long-term process, a long-term program of a government where they actually put in their own monies. And then the development partners come and support the efforts that government have put in place. I don't think, however, that it is the right time now to jump and abandon poverty reduction initiatives and shift into other new models of financing because there are difficulties in the region. I don't think that we need to give more priority to the private sector that has failed over 20 years, put the finances in them, while the poverty reduction programs have not yielded much. I think we need to see how we balance this equation. But we also think that it is important to pursue economic diversification and structural transformation. We must move beyond extractive industries. We must move beyond just focusing on agriculture and move to value addition manufacturing sector. Move to services sector and get all the sectors active in a manner that all of them can contribute to development. But if we are going to insist that indeed Africans want their minerals out and therefore let's help them, and that then becomes the approach, I am afraid we are going to miss the boat. So let's think of a way on how we are going to diversify the economic structure and ensure that all sectors are active, because when Africa is rich, you're actually richer. Think about it. When Africa is rich, you have more markets in Africa. You have more opportunities in Africa. And so investing in a growing Africa is more beneficial to you than if it is sinking and you are fleecing its minerals. I think for me that's the right way to do it. Don't mind about my language. I'm not very diplomatic. So that even in the current scenario, we need to think around also how do we continue developing the agricultural sector? How do we make it more productive? Addressing issues of food security, for instance. But we don't want it to continue remaining the biggest contributor to the GDP. We don't want it to continue being that. And so we must think around a way of making it more productive, but also increasingly moving away from that sector to other sectors that can equally generate more income to the economy. We also need to give great attention to social development. I think we need to focus on education, like I said, health, and governments must deliver better on safety nets. And I think there are very many experiences from Canada or other countries where provision of safety nets have worked in some areas. We can learn through this. The other issue that we also wanted to propose is that issue of innovation and technology transfer for increased value addition for us is also important. Because we are tired of just exporting gold in its raw form, oil, iron, oil. I think we can do better. And what African governments are saying, that we want to transform our economies and we want to begin a new framework where we can also add value to the commodities that we sell out there. And I would be happy to hear Canadian government discussing how they are going to propose to promote value addition of African communities in the continent. I think that would be very interesting. We also, I'm almost finishing. We also raised the issue of opportunities provided by green economy. We don't know what that is going to look like in the future. We are still trying to understand it, but we think it is an opportunity that could be used to address some of the development challenges that faces the continent. But most importantly for us is the issue of moving from the private sector, because it has failed, to focusing on the citizens. For us, that is the most important. All those other things are details, but putting the citizens at the center is important. And we think that if citizens participate in decision making, public monitoring, and implementation of the national development agenda, things will go different. Because at this stage, we feel that if government is held by the interests of the citizens, they are less likely to sell out. They are less likely to be rigid in changing their tune or policy options when they are confronted by the big multinationals or foreign governments. But in as much as we keep them aloof and they are not involved in the process, it becomes very difficult for governments actually to be held accountable for wrong decisions that they take. We also think that government must make deliberate effort to help the people acquire assets and access resources to participate in sustainable development. I think that is very important, because citizens participating in economic activity is more useful than for them just waiting to receive handouts. And we think if we make citizens as one of the instruments for economic growth, then it becomes more useful in terms of sustainability and in terms of also addressing the redistribution element that Fraser was talking about earlier. The other issue is we must enable people's organization to participate in the development agenda. I think it is not only in Canada where civil society are facing difficulty. For us, ours is triple, because you are physically and mentally abused in doing your work. And that kind of has presents a challenge with regard to how you engage with your government or how citizens access their government in the context of demanding transparency and accountability. And if citizens are to own the development agenda, if they are to become actors in the development agenda, it is important that their organizations and institutions are involved in setting up the agenda, in designing it, and also in monitoring and evaluating it. And that only happens if governments create enabling environment for such kind of activities to thrive. And so we call for creation of enabling environment for CSOs to engage. I'm being looked at very harshly by the moderator, so I'm sure.